All right, welcome my friends to episode 695. We're closing in on episode 700 of Extreme Health Radio. Thanks a lot for joining us. I hope you guys are doing well wherever you are in the world today. Thanks again. I'm going to put links to Jim's website and everything that we talk about at extremehealthradio.com/695, which is the show page for today's episode. And we're going to talk about vitamin D. And you know what's interesting about vitamin D is that every person in the natural and alternative health world is saying that we need to take vitamin D and vitamin D3, vitamin D2 for vegans, blah, blah, blah. But we're going to talk about why we should not supplement this hormone. And it's actually a hormone. And with Jim Stephenson today. So if you are new to the show, we do shows every Friday morning at 10:45 a.m. Pacific time. And then they get published to our iTunes account and podcast apps on Sunday evenings. So make sure to subscribe. And then also something really, really cool is that our new shows come out Sunday evening. And then the other 6 days of the week, we re-air our best of episodes. So you get a podcast every single day of the week. And then the new ones come out on Sunday evenings. So stay tuned for that. And if you could, it would be really helpful if you wanted to leave us a rating and review. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. That's how people find us and find this type of information. Because if vitamin D really is rat poison, and it's something that mainstream alternative health practitioners are promoting and it could damage you, then we want to make sure that people get access to this type of information. So make sure to share it on Instagram or anywhere else you listen to your podcasts on. So we appreciate that. Next week, we're going to have Dane Barkley. We're going to talk about light and blue blocking. We're going to talk the Friday after that with John Schott about rewilding big C, little v. Next Friday. And then the Friday after that, we're going to talk with Nicholas Pinot. We're going to talk with him and Brian Hoyer about the effects of non-native EMF and wireless radiation on our biology. So those would be really, really, really good shows to listen to. So make sure to subscribe wherever you are. And Jim Stephenson, I was introduced to him a few years ago, but then reintroduced to him through my friend Matt Blackburn's podcast, Mito Life Radio, which you should all be listening to. Great show that he does over there. And so then I got inspired to contact Jim again, or Jim for the first time. And so we did that. And now we're going to have a really, really great show about vitamin D and the effects of vitamin D on calcification, on our DNA and everything. So let me bring his audio in here. There we go. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jim, for joining us today on today's episode. I appreciate that so much.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. Look how many shows you've done and the guests that you have on. This is a really impressive show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, like I was saying just a second ago, I learned about your work some years ago, but then I was reintroduced to you through Matt Blackburn's podcast. And so I thought it was really interesting because the work that you're doing on vitamin E, or vitamin D, I should say, is completely counter what most people are talking about. Everyone is saying to take vitamin D, right?
Yeah, everyone is pretty much it. No matter what your woke position is and you broke off from mainstream, that's the one thing you pull in with you. Most of the groups actually have some sort of foundational post inside their group that addresses the deficiency and takes the mainstream position within their non-mainstream position.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at what's going around these days in terms of the big C, little v is what I'll call it, so we don't get censored. But vitamin D and zinc and these types of things are what's being promulgated as the natural antidotes. But it's interesting. Anytime something is widely promoted, I'm always a little suspect. I always figure, okay, it's time to look into this, and especially with something like vitamin D, because it's not really a vitamin in as much as it's a hormone. Is that correct?
That's true. When we first discovered it back in the 30s, we discovered the D3 aspect of it, which is, you could call it a vitamin if you want. It's a substrate to make what's a secosteroid hormone. It has one carbon ring that isn't fully closed, and that's the difference between it and a true steroid. So it has the different levels of activation that everybody's focused on, which is the D3 that you take. You can call it a vitamin if you want. The 25D that you store, And the 125D, that is the immune response molecule, that's the most powerful, naturally occurring steroid molecule in the human body.
So there's a lot of different directions we could go starting out, like the testing, the 125, the 25, the active, then the storage. But just to start out, this is the softball question. Why should people avoid taking supplemental vitamin D?
Well, the first reason, and that's the one that nobody agrees with, knee-jerk reaction is to disagree with, is that there isn't a deficiency in the first place. If you want to completely agree with the goal of 30 plus or 40 plus using the US measurements of Mg, you can use that. But the reality is that when you get tested, if you are below that level, if you were to turn around and test the active form, which is the goal, which all the papers that write all the praising of vitamin D, I call it all the accolades, they all belong to that immune response molecule. So you're to assume, because you're below this goal that was set by a man and raised in 2010, almost tripled, in fact, just because you're not attaining that, you're to assume that means you're low in what it makes, the active form of vitamin D. But that isn't the case, it turns out, for many reasons. But we have found that low 25D is a marker for illness, not the cause, and it's coupled typically, especially in sick people, with high active vitamin D.
Okay, so people are testing in the wrong places, or they're doing the wrong test. They're testing typically for 25D, and they should be testing for 125 or 125D. Is that correct?
That is correct. And you can look at both of them, but this goes back to, this is how the doctors are trained. My insurance is at play here, because if you want to look at the active form, it doesn't have a seasonal variation. That's important to realize. It has a diurnal rhythm. It's made every day. It has a very short half-life. It's 8 to 12 hours. So the body's constantly deciding how much of that to produce. And so you need to check that definitely to see if it's high. It will wreck a lot of other systems if it's high. And if it's low, that's life-threatening. That you really want to know that. Those are the people that have chronic kidney disease and hyperthyroidism. And that, too much of that really powerful molecule, it will steal other receptors.
So when someone is taking in vitamin D3, let's just say vitamin D3, because a lot of vegans are taking vitamin D2, and you've said before that that's possibly a saving grace for those people. But with the vitamin D3, what's happening in their body when they consume that?
Okay, so the D3, there's a lot of different kind of pills. We're talking about a pill right now, aren't we?
Right, yeah.
Okay, so there's hard pills. There's the ones that it's suspended in a liquid. There's a lot of difference. But at the end of the day, vitamin D itself, being a steroid class molecule, is a complex lipid. So it's already a fat. So if it went in as a fat, it would be handled as a fat, and the pill wouldn't have to come in with fat like most people say. It's just because you're taking it in a inferior form that you need to have fat with it. But the way it's acquired is entirely different. The gut is a food processing fermenting area. And so you have it picked up, actually fats are picked up by the lymphatic system. So its shuttle will be LDL cholesterol. So LDL cholesterol doesn't have the main goal of carrying fat molecules to the liver necessarily. It may store it anywhere along the way. It's just a transport system. It's not your main avenue for vitamin D, less than 10%.
Really? So when people are taking, sometimes, I don't know, what's the highest vitamin D that, I've heard of people doing IV vitamin D, and it's just these levels that people are taking are just astronomical.
Yeah, I've heard of 150,000, stuff like that. What you never see in any of those papers, you never see them track it though. You never find out where it went. and vitamin D leaves in fecal matter, not urine. So it's a lot more complex to test too.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody's looking for that. Nobody's looking where it goes or what it becomes. If your 25D level isn't where they want it to be or where you agree it should be, and you'll just take more D3. And what'll end up happening is you'll finally take enough D3 to satisfy the serum level that they want, because it's like sending, I live in Ellensburg, it's 2 hours to Seattle. It's like sending out frequent shuttles. At any time you sample the highway between here and Seattle, you'll have the number of shuttles you want as long as I constantly send them down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they don't like bolus dosing. That's why they like you to take it every day. And then you finally get to a level that'll get you where they want. And everybody's different. Some people are fine with between 20 and 30. I'm using US measurements.
Mm-hmm.
Some people want you above 30. Some people definitely want above 40. Some people say you got to get above 80. Some want to get above 100.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's different.
Yeah, it's interesting
as
because
far
I
as
think
what they say.
wasn't that sort of promulgated by, what was his name, Michael Hollick, in the vitamin D solution book that he had, or vitamin D cure or something? Didn't he say
Yes.
that? Yeah, he wanted to get people's serums up above 80, right?
Yeah, he likes that number. He's the one that got the Endocrine Society to adopt, I think, officially 40 plus.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how he decided to do that. Maybe it was just as a reaction, because what happened, the United States and Canada, they asked the New York Academy of Sciences, the Institutes of Medicine, to look at the literature on vitamin D. And they did an exhaustive search of the literature. They did an 1,100-page report that came out in 2008. And they said, 20 is fine. 20 is absolutely fine. You don't need to be trying to attain anything more than that. And that was a departure from around 12 and a half was the goal before that.
Yeah, there's a study that I came across. It says here on PubMed that it says we found an inverse association between 25D and all-cause and cardiovascular disease mortality in healthy adults with serum 25D, 25OD levels of 21. Clinical trials for the primary prevention of cardiovascular disease with 25 supplementation may target healthy adults with serum 25D levels of 21 nanometers to validate these findings. So what the study was saying was basically that there's no real benefit to being over 21. Is that correct?
That sounds right. Is that the paper? I think they used that data set and they wrote 3 different papers with it. No benefit above 21. They saw C-reactive proteins start to rise, if it's the paper I'm thinking of.
Yeah, this one was from Mohammed Amer.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's the one. That's the one that Morley always talks about.
Oh, right.
But he didn't realize they wrote 3 different papers with it. But yeah, the benefit gets cut in half if you read the full text version of that.
So what they're saying in the study is that there's no known benefit above level 21. Then why is Michael Hollick and other people like that? I mean, there's a lot of really smart people like Dr. Jack Cruz, and there's all kinds of people out there promoting vitamin D. Why are they saying that they want to get your levels up to over 80?
Well, all of those people, and I've talked to some brilliant people, they really have never even entertained the thought of looking at the 125D, the active form. Right. They just don't even think about it. When I talked to a contact with Robert Kennedy's Children's Health Defense Organization, mm-hmm. she was getting ready to reach out to all the researchers, and she just knew they all had all those data sets. And I told her, you're not going to find a single data set on 125D. And she didn't believe it. And I didn't hear from her for 9-10 months. And then I sent her a couple new papers, and I never really got anything back from them.
That's amazing. So the main issue is that the mainstream alternative people are looking in the wrong place. They're looking at 25D and not 125. That's the main issue, right?
Right. And they may have some positive results. We talked about it's the most powerful naturally occurring steroid in the human body. So mm-hmm. that's at play when you take it, if you're one of the people that activates it to the active form. But this is a hurdle that people really struggle with. Is there's the placebo effect, and it's real, it's scientific, it's biological, and it can't be ignored. And you see it when they do placebos in the chemo trials.
Mm-hmm.
The people, because they anticipate that their hair is going to fall out, a certain, I think it's 60% effective,
Mm-hmm.
their hair falls out because they expect it to.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, and it's really important to point this out, they didn't manifest the positive outcome that they could have from a placebo. They only seem to manifest the negative part, the losing of the hair.
Mm-hmm.
That's different when you're somebody that's been searching for your answer and they tell you it's vitamin D. It sounds like such a wonderful thing. It's a vitamin. Three
Mm-hmm.
generations called it a vitamin. And it just seems to fit, and they either get a steroid effect from it or they get a placebo effect. And for a lot of people, it's like when they finally get a diagnosis, that's a big relief in and of itself. And if you believe in what you have that time, yeah, you may feel better, but in the long run, that doesn't mean, just like with steroids, you're not going to allow a disease state to persist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting
Load.
because like I'm a follower of Dr. Ray Peat, and
Okay.
he doesn't really speak too highly of like fish oils and things like that, and neither does our mutual friend Adam Bergstrom. But what Ray Peat will say was like there's usually a 60-day window where people feel really, really good on something like a fish oil, but then the inverse starts to happen, and you start getting all these downstream negative effects of taking. And I guess that's what you're saying is someone may just have a placebo effect from taking vitamin D3, and then eventually it wears off, and you're getting this hypercalcification going on, right?
Correct. Because of the way it's picked up and acquired, it's entirely different. When you make vitamin D in the skin, and the building blocks are different too for the substrates. They're a different pathway in the skin than they are internally. But when you make it there, it's vitamin D binding protein. That's a sibling to albumin. Really
Wait a minute.
important
When you
protein.
make it in your skin, you mean?
Yes, when you make it in your skin,
Okay.
D3, it's going to get transported by vitamin D binding protein, which is, like I said, a sibling to albumin. These are hugely important blood proteins. And so your vitamin D binding protein transports it when you make it that way. That's not going to get deposited in fat. It does have a map. And it's wherever the body is asking it to go because it's going to be guided. And if you know, vitamin D binding protein is what will later become GCMAF. I don't know if we can have that in the recording. So,
Yeah.
so it's pretty important. It's like sending your warriors into battle with their weapons.
And the thing that's interesting too is whenever you get to something like this that is really a complex situation, it's like melatonin or sunlight or vitamin D3 or lipid peroxides or iron. Like these things are really complex systems. For iron, heavy metals, and they're really complex. So I think sometimes people in the natural health world just don't want to do that much research and go down these rabbit trails. Because what I was going to say is, isn't it true that prior to 2008 or 2009, somewhere in there, the level of D3, that the blood serum was 12.5, and that was, relatively good?
It would have been the 25 OHD3 that they were checking, but yes, it was 12.5 was completely satisfactory. And there have been papers that came out after the Institutes of Medicine that were on Holic side that helped get the goal moved by certain societies like the Endocrine Society. And there was a paper titled The Big Mistake, like they did some calculations when they really looked at existing science. So there's been things along the way that have supported that, and they've really wanted to move the control of PTH to 25-OHD3, which we've known for decades is controlled by 125D, the active form.
Mm-hmm. How many types of vitamin D are there? Do we know? A guest on our show, Adam Bergstrom, I think I overheard him saying one time there's over 100 different types, but I don't know if anyone knows that.
Oh, probably at least. You can find new ones all the time. It's just a matter of searching. When I finally thought that I had found all the vitamin D molecules, all I did was start doing certain searches and choosing image. and it
Mm-hmm.
was crazy the kind of stuff that you could find. I've found probably 70. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that there were that many. In fact, at one point, I made an analogy video using the Steve Martin piece from The Jerk. I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
remember it, where he's
Oh yeah.
giving away that little section that's like 2 inches by whatever. There's erasers there or something. I said, that's
Uh-huh.
25D right here. That's where they're hurting you. And all these prizes over here, all the wonderful D molecules that you're being guided away from, told to stay out of the sun.
Wow, that's
But
so
yeah, there's a
interesting.
ton of them. There's a ton of them, and the other ones do a lot more recycling, so to speak. There's a lot of efficiency in the other molecules, whereas this pathway that we're focused on is a repair pathway. That's the best way to look at it. And the other pathways going out in the sun are the maintenance ones.
Okay.
So just like with your car, you want to maintain. You don't want to wait till it breaks down and then have to repair. That's all the autoimmune people.
Is it because that we don't haven't really done the research and really know all of these other forms of vitamin D that sort of vitamin D2 and D3 get the spotlight? Is it because people just haven't put the work in and understand what all the other forms do?
It's kind of like what Terry Wall said in Minding Our Mitochondria. She ate all those veggies because she knew that there was going to be a number of things in there that we had yet to discover, and they could possibly be the best thing that she was getting out of the whole deal.
Interesting.
So yeah, what we don't, and the stuff that I found is way more important than the stuff we're focused on. Um, yeah, it's a lot bigger world. This world that we're focused on is D3 becomes 25D, and then that's kind of where everybody stops.
Mm-hmm. Because it's
They
easy,
don't.
right? To just
Yeah, and
stop
that's
there.
they, and I think you could stop there if maybe you were even an MTHFR savvy person. You might think folate to methylfolate, cobalamin to methylcobalamin. You might be, oh, we're active because that's what everybody's focused on. Even the woke people, or even the woke doctors. I mean, look, Ben Lynch even went back to that. It's absurd.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember Morley saying once that like with this MTHFR they make it so complicated, but he was saying that the T in that the transferase enzymes is copper dependent, and so a lot of times people increase their bioavailable copper through proper liver function and creating ceruloplasmin and these
Right,
types of things, and eating foods high in retinol and increasing their copper levels, and their MTHFR symptoms go down as a result, and
right.
things people don't think about, you know.
Right. Well, MTHFR is really complex too. There are some SNPs that you can look at, and you can see manifestations of them, like tongue ties and stuff like that. But the MTHFR genotype inherited by the fetus is determined by the photoperiod present for the mother at conception time. So it's pretty wild. So it's meant to be an advantage pretty much for where you are at the time. Maybe some nutritional things mess it up, like folic acid instead of having folate,
Mm-hmm.
and make that SNP rather than a pure advantage somewhat of a disadvantage. But also, there's something to be said about riboflavin, and I'm thinking it was Chris. Is it Chris Masterjohn? Is that
Mm-hmm.
okay? I think
Yeah.
he said it's just a riboflavin deficiency, and you can find some support for that if you do a little bit of research. The B vitamins are really important, and there's a lot to be said there. There's a lot of stuff to look at in the B vitamins.
What are the main differences for vitamin D2 and vitamin D3? Like, what are the main ones?
So the D2 is what is made by the plants, and the D3 is the animal form.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a D4, which is also a plant or a fungi form. Also, it's just slightly different. The D2 was originally in eukaryotes, I think it was, as a
Uh-huh.
sunscreen in their skin, a lot like melanin is in our skin now. So that's what you can read the historic perspective on D2. And
So
so
that's why a lot of vegans are like they like the D2, right?
right, because it's not an animal form.
Mm-hmm.
But if they go in the sun, they're going to possess their own animal form that they're going to make, the D3.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not going to be consuming it. which is their goal.
So, how long ago did you start getting into that? I should have asked you this at the beginning because it seems like you've been into this for a long time.
I started looking at this stuff in around 2005, 2006.
Wow. Why?
The ex-wife had a bunch of problems, health problems. Went to the doctor. They did your typical vitamin D test. It was 23. They order a bunch of other tests. They immediately blame everything they can find on the vitamin D deficiency. Do a DEXA scan. Label fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. It was 23 was the level, 23 nanogram, and went on the 50,000 IU. I'm sure it was D2. Wow. I can't find anywhere now after the fact it was D2, but most of that is D2, and it actually made it drop. It dropped from 23 to 11, and it wouldn't budge from there.
Wait a second. So her storage 25D went down from 21 or 23 to 11 after taking 50,000 IUs of vitamin D2?
Yeah, just once a week though. It's a once a week dose, but it's still a lot to take. But yeah.
Well, why would that happen, I wonder?
Because the body doesn't want it. The body is going to sequester it. A lot of that probably ran right through and became 125D. Wasn't testing that at that time. But the pathogens, that's what vitamin D's for, is to fight pathogens. That's why it's a repair thing. Those pathogens are already in your rec and stuff. And so 125D goes to the vitamin D receptor, and it's called a dimer. We talked about this on Matt's show. It's only one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is vitamin A, and they work together, and they make things called VDREs, vitamin D response elements. Those are the warriors. They're chemical and biological. So you make T cells, macrophages, things like that. It depends. The body has already decided what it wants. So the vitamin D arrives wherever to a cell, and there's already DNA. There's already a gene there that the body's decided it wants encoded, and it's like a recipe is ready there, and it's going to be presented. And the vitamin A and the vitamin D they're going to be the chefs. They're going to cook up that recipe, and they're going to put out whatever it ordered, be it a macrophage, or it might be an antimicrobial peptide. It could be any number of things, but the body already decided, because it has to produce the DNA that it's going to encode there. And we've confirmed 913 genes it encodes. It's suspected to encode well over 5,000.
Really? What does that mean in code?
The body it can take the DNA, and it puts it at the DNA binding site, and it makes the vitamin D response elements. It's just, that's the work that occurs. So when you're tracking 25D, you don't know if any of that's occurring. It's a completely different molecule.
Well, it's interesting because I think you mentioned on that show too with Matt over on MitoLife that the mechanism of action of once someone takes this hormone D is unknown, right? Like we don't know what the body does with it, right?
Yeah, it could do any number of things. Like I just said, we know it could make 5,000 different things. That's assuming it stays in your body and goes to that level. The reason it drops in some people is because you have pathogens in you like Epstein-Barr. And Epstein-Barr, some people struggle with it. If you had somebody that had a really rough go of mono, especially if they dealt with it in college, they're probably struggling today. And they're probably being told with the mainstream test that it's not Epstein-Barr. And if you solicit enough tests, you can see the antigens over time, and that it is that. Even they play a lot of games with antibodies, IgG, IgM. I don't know that much about them, but they'll tell you that's not a current infection, and then you'll watch that number go up, and that's the historic infection number. Why did it just go up over the last 6 months? It's not very historic, But the molecules that they make that we test for, the antigens that we make antibodies for, the reason that pathogen Epstein-Barr is still around is because those molecules they secrete happen to fit like a key into the vitamin D receptor, just like the active form of vitamin D. So their presence in your body causes your body to want to make a bunch of active vitamin D to fight them, but they're already occupying the place where the activity will occur. So they block it. And what ends up happening, and this goes to some of the stuff that you're saying about Ray Peat and the oils, and all these things are very promiscuous. They all have affinities to receptors. Those are the kind of things that Trevor Marshall calculates. He does really deep science. So the vitamin D, the active form, is so tightly controlled that it actually has a higher affinity to several of the other receptors, but tight regulation keeps it from going there. The thyroid's a perfect example. Mm-hmm. The minute that there's not a home for vitamin D, it's wrecking the thyroid. It's going over there, and so then the thyroid's not able to do its job because it's displaced. Its hormone is displaced. And at the same time, you could probably start research today and find out what its displaced hormone goes and does. I've never even bothered to look at that.
Wow. So you're saying if there's not a place for vitamin D, meaning we have an excess amount, right?
Or we have just what we need, but it can't get to its home.
Interesting. Wow. That's super fast. It's kind of like what Morley talks about. We're going to take a little break right now, but it's kind of like what Morley talks about with the iron recycling program, the endothelial reticulo, whatever it is program. He talks about how the iron is supposed to go back to the bone marrow to make new red blood cells, but many times it gets stuck in the tissues. And so this whole recycling program doesn't work. And it sounds like vitamin D is similar as well. I hope you guys are enjoying the show so far with Mr. Jim Stephenson Jr. I'd recommend, if you guys want to follow some of this work and look further into the work that he's doing, he's got a Facebook group called Secosteroid Hormone D. So look that up in your groups on Facebook, and you can join that group and just kind of go further with this conversation. The show page for today's show is episode 695, so I'll put the links to that group as well as the products and everything else at extremehealthradio.com/695. Hope you guys are enjoying the show. We're going to run a little ad right now for one of my favorite things, the Relax Far Infrared Sauna, and I love sauna therapy. And here is our biological dentist, Dr. Stuart Nunley. And by the way, if you're looking for a really good biological dentist, go to his website, healthysmilesforlife.com. I cannot recommend him highly enough, but he had mercury poisoning, and sauna therapy is how he overcame that. And listen to him talk about that.
You know what I chose to do? I chose to go very, very slow as I detox. So one of the things that I did is I invested in an infrared sauna, which was huge. That was a big, big part of my healing because, interestingly enough, many times patients who have heavy metal toxicity lose the ability to sweat. And so I was one of those. I could not break a sweat. And the infrared sauna helped me to retrain my body to be able to sweat. It was a huge part of my overall detox.
Doesn't Dr. Huggins say, as long as there's more going out than what's coming in, you're okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think he's right. I think he's absolutely right on that.
And here's our buddy Daniel Vitalis talking about sweating as well.
Use your sauna. I know you guys promote saunas. I won't go on about that. But I think it's important to use saunas because they help to increase body temperature. There's a lot of great benefits to that. But some that I like are that in wild nature, we experience hot and cold. And at room temperature, which is a domesticated thing, we don't really get to feel metabolic extremes. So I think it's really good to challenge your body to cool itself and to heat itself. And so because I'm saying heat itself, I really recommend cold showers. Let's say 80% of your showers and cold. You know, right? You don't have to do it every time, but most of the time, if you end your shower cold, you'll start to build up your resistance to cold, and you'll also really tonify your skin and also kind of help to wring your body out at a detox level. That's really important.
So there's an immune response when you start putting the body under heat like that. And so when I'm thinking immune response, I'm thinking big C, little v. I'm thinking about people taking the V. and I'm thinking about shedding that's happening as a result of people getting these injections. And I'm thinking about the fall and flu season and the coming winter after the summer here. So I'm starting to think like maybe it's time to invest in something like a sauna like this. So I really, really recommend these things. These are amazing pieces of equipment. We have all kinds of saunas in our store. We have the ozone saunas. We have the wooden saunas. We have the near infrared. But the one I like and use the most is the Relax Far Infrared sauna. I'll put a link in the video description down below. You should see that. Or if you're listening on audio, I'll put a link to our store, biochargeme.com. Over at extremehealthradio.com/695. And here's Nathan Walls. We did, this is a 4-minute clip, but I'm only going to play about 60 seconds of it, from Nathan Walls talking about red light therapy. And we're speaking about vitamin D today and light, so I thought this would be a good one. And here he is talking about red light frequency.
So red light actually penetrates your skin much deeper.
Okay.
Red light can penetrate up to 30 centimeters.
Oh, wow.
So it doesn't penetrate as deeply into bone, but if you have, fat or muscle, it penetrates pretty deeply into there. So blue light, it doesn't penetrate as deeply, but it's the highest energy frequency of light in the visible spectrum. And blue light is in the sun too. So blue light is not a bad thing in nature, because when you get blue light from the sun, it's balanced with these other colors of light. And red light is very regenerative. And that's why I'm sure you've had people on your show, Justin, that talk about photobiomodulation or low-level light therapy, using specific frequencies of red light to regenerate your skin or to speed up muscle recovery. It's very big in professional sports. It's big. A lot of vets are using it now too. I think I hear about more vets using it on animals than doctors using it on humans. But beauticians use it. It's really good for your skin. Some places women go to for, get a haircut, they'll put them in front of like a red light thing in their face because it's good for their skin too. Yeah.
So red light therapy, I won't play the whole commercial, but it's really just an amazing technology to look into, because it's really great for your mitochondria, for allowing your mitochondria to create more ATP, which is critical for our health, right? If you're lacking the ability to make ATP in your mitochondria, then you just don't have energy for anything. But it's also great for anti-aging, wound healing, scars, collagen production in the skin, for skin damage. I like to use it before I go in the sun. Like if I'm going to go surfing or something, I'll preload with red light and some of Matt's vitamin E that he has over at MitoLife. And, it's great for inflammation as well. So if you had surgery or something, if you want to reduce wrinkles, if you have burns, anything on the skin, but it's also great for overall anti-aging and metabolic health as well. So I recommend the Juve machine. You can check those out in the links down below, or at extremehealthradio.com/695, which is today's show. And I'll put links there if you guys want to check out the Juve. And you probably, if you follow me on Instagram, you see how I use it pretty much every single day. But we are with Jim Stephenson, and his Facebook group is called Secosteroid Hormone D. And I want to ask him about the red light, as well as there's also other types of light that you can purchase, like the Spurti vitamin D lamp, which we have in our store, that creates that UVB frequency. And it's my understanding that the UVB, I think it's around 280 to 320. I think that's about right, where you create UVB frequencies and help to create vitamin D in the skin. Did I get those frequencies correct, Jim?
That's the range I'm familiar with, 280 to 320.
280, and it's UVB that does the vitamin D creation in the skin. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so with those, because when people ask me about vitamin D, I never recommend them they take it. I always recommend getting it from the sun, but if you have to get it from a device, something like a Spurti would be good. Do you know anything about these light therapy devices for vitamin D?
I know a little bit about them. I think if you look at the Spurti, it's not just UVB. I could be confusing it with the Fuji. He's got a couple lamps, but there's a lot of lamps now that are using the 311 nanometer narrow band. And so just that, out of that whole range, just 311. And its selling point is that it doesn't degrade folate, and that because it takes 4 minutes to make ample vitamin D with that frequency, and you don't degrade your folate in that time. Normally, when you go in the sun, you're getting all 280 to 320. When you're making the vitamin D, you're breaking down your folate. That's why you darken, is to protect a certain amount of that. It's a delicate dance the body has to do.
Oh,
You
that's
need to
so interesting. So
protect your folate.
when you're in the sun, you're getting full frequencies, but the UVB frequency portion of the sun would be 280 to 320, and then the sun will decrease your folate, and that's why you increase your melanin and get darker.
Yes, and there's two different forms of melanogenesis. There's just a rearrangement, and then there's also summoning new melanin to be made, and they both are handled differently by UVA versus UVB. That's why people are able to tan with UVA only.
I thought UVB was the one that you create the tan, or are tanning beds UVA only?
A lot of them are nowadays. You have to ask them. Either one will tan you. They just have slightly different mechanisms.
So what is the lamp? So you found a lamp that does 311 only? That's interesting.
Yeah. Yes. It's a photomodulation lamp made by Philips.
How can I find that?
I wouldn't necessarily recommend a lamp anymore. I was talking to Matt the other day, and I said the reason is because I haven't found anyone ever that finally got their 125D checked, and it was actually low. I know a couple people that would be the case. I didn't look at their labs, but they are hypoparathyroid. So they would have almost non-existent 125D, and they take it. So that's a whole different world. And the other reason is I've looked at this disease called XP. It's a pigment disease, pigmentosa something. Mm-hmm. And those people, they have to avoid sunlight. And their active vitamin D, all the markers associated with it are just fine. They stay fine. They don't have any clinical signs of vitamin D deficiency present. They have low normal levels of both forms of vitamin D, 25 and 125D.
So it's so interesting because I'm hearing you talk about this. I'm just wondering, like, if someone like Michael Hollick were listening, or someone who promotes vitamin D, when you share with them information about this, where someone's vitamin D levels do not go down when they're not exposed to the sun, what has been their response? Have you had conversations with people, and what do they say to that?
Well, the problem is that if there can be a lot of people that go out in the sun or even use a lamp, and that there's no guarantee that's going to increase their 25D. It's not obligated to be in serum. That's not its hangout. It's a fat soluble. If you went back 20 years, would just be thinking basic biology and realize that the vast majority of vitamin D is stored in the body. And that's the problem with them going ahead, and it's realistic and probably good intention to try to come up with a blood serum level of vitamin D. And I think we had it. Now we've created a deficiency in almost everyone that
just
wasn't present.
The numbers
just by changing the number. And it's also, we only change the number and this is really important, the only goal that got adjusted was the storage form, the 25D. We didn't adjust the active form goal. So there's no true deficiency. That tells you that right there, does it not?
So if people really want to get tested, they should be testing the 1-25 or 1,25, right?
Right, but that's a battle. That really is a battle, because it has to be frozen because of its 8-hour half-life, and they're trained in medical school. There's a huge paper by the Endocrine Society, I think it is, that says choose wisely. I mean, they start right there insulting in the beginning. Choose wisely. Don't routinely measure 125D. So they tell you to only measure it in a couple conditions where they know it's going to be high, like sarcoidosis.
Right.
That's because Trevor Marshall found it. That's the whole reason that's now in the record.
Really?
See, and he had that disease, and he's a foremost expert on the human genome. Mm-hmm. And so, they kind of really had to add that.
Yeah, I was telling you before the show that we were in contact with him like 2 years ago, and I think he had asked me a question, and then I just forgot to get back to him. But he does a lot of work with vitamin D, and I think he was working, with Lyme disease, because he's down in Australia, right? He's having some pretty good success with Lyme disease, right? And vitamin D.
I didn't know that. I know he is down in Australia. He spoke out a bit about electrosmog, and things like that at the cellular level. He has a ton of papers. I mean, the guy writes a lot of stuff.
I came across this in relation to vitamin D3 being called a rat poison, and it says Macaulay calciferol vitamin D3 has been used for decades at high doses for rat poison. This hormone causes blood calcium to rise to toxic levels. This in turn leads to kidney damage, bleeding, and heart problems. And mouse poison is toxic to pets and must be kept well out of their reach. Rat poison? That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's real effective because when you take vitamin D and you up your blood serum level of it, and in that case, they probably pollute their blood with D3 directly. I don't know what they measure in them. I don't know if it makes it to 125D, but any of them at a high enough dose, they just tell the body you have to have more calcium in your blood with this vitamin D. There's this perfect ratio. So when you start saying, 20 in my blood is not enough, I need 80. Well, you have to have that amount of calcium too. And what if that's all you changed in your life was all of a sudden you started going for that vitamin D? Well, the calcium's got to come from somewhere, and timing matters too. You might be getting the calcium, but not at the right time. So when you need calcium and there's none in the gut, it's going to take it from bone, and that's what it does to those rodents. They don't have enough calcium to match vitamin D, so they just pull everything they can from the bones, and then they get kidney stones of the calcium, and they pollute all their veins and arteries. And
you know what's interesting about osteoporosis and bone issues, because I've always heard from sort of in my vegan days where the pH of your blood changes, and it's my understanding that calcium is a very tight regulator of the pH of systems and organs. And so, but what they'll say is that the pH of the blood gets altered in some way, and then your body's got to regulate the pH of the blood so it will pull calcium from your bones, like you just said. But people aren't putting the connection together that this could all be caused because most vegans and people are taking vitamin D3 or vitamin D, and this is what's precipitating this, but thinking that the vitamin D is helping their bones when in actuality it's doing the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. It is doing the opposite. And I've read that stuff you're talking about with the bone, and I think I read that at the Not Milk page, the pH stuff. That is interesting stuff. But what's happening is they're looking at the 25D at a elevated goal, which if they had the old goal, first off, there wouldn't even be a discussion. But so they're looking at that at an elevated goal. So they're short. We need some more of that. Whereas a lot of those sick people, they'll actually have the high 125D coupled with it. So the absolute opposite of a deficiency. And the people might be, both camps might be looking at PTH, but one camp's going to think 25 is in control of PTH, and they'll say it's too low too. That's why PTH is high. It won't stabilize till we're at 80. Nanomole is the number I saw on that. So I don't know what that works out to NG, but it's a little lower. But so if you were to look at the right form of vitamin D right there, this person's high, and that would explain the high PTH, not the low 25D, because it doesn't really control PTH. But let's say both groups are looking at calcium too. That's another huge mistake in mainstream. They look at the wrong form of calcium. So you got to look at ionized calcium. That's the one that matters. So you can take the same data from both camps as long as you had all those tests, and one would be telling you they have a vitamin D deficiency and it's causing osteoporosis, and the other one would tell you they have an excess, they have hypervitaminosis D, and it's causing the osteoporosis. And that's the difference between us and other countries. Hector DeLuca talks about this. In our country, you cannot treat osteoporosis with 125D. We have too much calcium, and you'd kill your patients. He's not going to say the other part of that. we got to osteoporosis by another mechanism in the first place. We put holes in our bones, taking vitamin D, causing our body to constantly pull it from our bone. We induced it ourselves. That's why it's not the answer. It was the cause for us.
Wow. That's so fascinating. And most people will never put that connection together, too. And something that I was thinking about, too, was we had recently a guy, Professor Martin Paul, and he was talking about the non-native EMF. Specifically, I think he was talking about dirty electricity, I think, the 60 hertz coming off the magnetic and electric frequencies from our walls. And, our wiring in our homes is not buffered. And so what he was saying was these frequencies will break down the cell wall and allow or sort of flood the inside of the cell with calcium. And so I'm just thinking, as you're talking, this connection between calcium and vitamin D, and I'm wondering, wow, what a pairing together if what Professor Paul is saying is correct, that the cell membranes are breaking down because of these non-native EMF, and then you add on top of that someone supplementing vitamin D, putting extra calcium, and because he was mapping out, I think, over 100 different disease states as a result of the calcium going inside the cell where it doesn't belong. And so I'm just putting together this connection between excess vitamin D intake and non-native EMF. I mean, this is like a soup for disease,
Right. Yeah. It sounds like it. And the cell wall being a target, that's the target of our antibiotics too. And we go after pathogens. And sometimes when we take out the cell wall of those pathogens, we actually don't kill those pathogens, and they continue as cell wall deficient forms. Some of those are called mycoplasma, and they have a sterol metabolism, as in cholesterol. So they'll eat any sterols. And so they eat that phospholipid cell wall you're talking about. They eat holes in it. And then they'd love to get in the mitochondria and steal the ATP. So that, and then they are aggravated by EMF. Most of the pathogens, 50 hertz, I guess, is a little bit better according to Klinghardt when it comes to aggravating things like Lyme. 60 hertz is much more antagonizing to these critters, is what you read.
And we're on like this alternating currency. We're on AC when DC would be so much better. I don't know why. I mean, maybe it was a little more expensive or something to be on AC instead of DC. But
no, that's a whole nother show.
Yeah. I'm curious. So when it comes to vitamin D3 and the proponents, the mainstream alternative health people, and they are, they'll go on and on about different success stories they've had with it, and I think in one of the papers I saw recently, it was originally discovered because it was help, to cure rickets. And so when people come with you when saying they're getting these great success stories because they're taking vitamin D, what do you say to that? And what do you think is actually happening in the body when someone has a turnaround with their health as a result of what they think is taking vitamin D? Like, what do you think is going on there?
Well, that goes back to that. It's going to be placebo or steroid. They're both really big. Some people don't have a whole lot wrong with them to begin with. And so it really doesn't take much. And if they aren't taking a whole lot of vitamin D, they can get away with it for a while. It just depends on the person. Like in the situation I gave you where they were at 23 and they took the 50,000 IU and it dropped to 11. I don't know where it would have gone if it would have been a lesser dose daily or if it would have been D3 per se. But everyone's a little different. But we do know, and the science is really clear on this, that the pathogens block it. That's why they're around. Clear back to leprosy. Leprosy, the oldest human disease, blocked chemical warriors that it made, blocked the mRNA or whatever, so that couldn't be made to fight it. So that's why they're all still around. So back in the rickets days, there was really a serious lack of sunshine. The buildings were really tall. Look at some of the photos from back then. There was a lot of pollution. This is the whole evolution of the pepper moth story time, on the aspen trees and stuff. How you might know that story, how they all of a sudden they were visible to all the birds and got picked off, and there was just a ton of pollution, and the sun didn't make it through, and there were two mutations. There was vitamin D dependent rickets and vitamin D resistant rickets, and those were prevalent. So what they did at first is they didn't actually give anybody vitamin D. They irradiated the cow's feed and the milk. And before they ever added vitamin D directly to anything, they had cured rickets.
Interesting.
And that's the true history of it if you do your research.
Wow. So much. It's like if you go down the vaccine rabbit hole and you start looking at all the diseases that have allegedly had cured, and you start looking at the real history, it changes pretty in a major way. Wow. So I'm curious, do you know the differences between, or what the relationship, I should say, between like retinol, because I know you're a fan of Morley and his work, and vitamin D and vitamin A, and ceruloplasmin and stuff. And do you know the relationship between vitamin A and vitamin D and ceruloplasmin and all that?
No, I don't know all of that. And that's going to be a hugely important blood protein just because we don't talk about it. And copper is going to be hugely important because we don't talk about it. And the fact that it has, is it electrons to give? He talks about the number in each molecule. I think it has electrons to give. It's like an antioxidant in that sense. So that's going to be a hugely important molecule, but I don't know how they relate. I know directly how vitamin A and vitamin D do their job to make the vitamin D response elements. The problem with the vitamin A world is that we only found the correct molecule in 2016 that does that. And it's called vitamin A5. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know we'd gone through 5 different wrong molecules, so to speak. But then I came to learn that the thyroid receptor is a pairing, and it has the RXR as well on one side with the thyroid hormone on the other. So I don't know about which ligand it uses. Was it wrong until 2016? So there's a lot of science out there that's completely sloppy, so you can't answer the questions that Ray Peat had about PUFA and things like that. They're just, we can only figure out what they write about and what they study, and that's what you're limited to. And vitamin A is way too iffy to make a lot of bold statements that hinge on a specific molecule of it.
Yeah, because what I think Morley talks about is that when you consume foods high in retinol, it allows copper to be loaded into that ceruloplasmin protein. And then if copper can't get into that protein, it'll be what they call unbound. And even though Morley says there's no such thing as unbound copper because it eventually binds to some other tissue or organ, but that's why when people do their hair tests, they say, oh, you're copper toxic. It's because there's not enough of that ceruloplasmin, which I think gets created in your liver. But I'm sure there's a connection between vitamin D and vitamin A and how that whole process works. It's just so fascinating because, like, Morley's work, Dr. Jack Kruse with light and sunshine and how that all affects this as well, and Ray Peat. I mean, to me, those 3 guys are so critical in putting all the pieces together,
I agree with you, and you're onto something there, and they all do go together. You have to think about how the vitamin D deficiency is a marker for illness, and there's tons of papers that actually say that. And the reason it would be is because 25D is a negative acute phase reactant. So when you have an incident, when you have a health crisis, it does tank. So does its carrier vitamin D binding protein. They're both negative acute phase reactants. So that number in and of itself is not a good indicator of, your ability to fight, because it's already going to be low when you're in a fight. But that doesn't mean you're out of the substrate, because you turn right around and check the active form, and it's off the charts.
So did
some
you
people
say
triple digits?
So did you say earlier that you can get that 125 tested, but it's just really difficult, or you can't even do it?
You can. Sometimes you can get your doctor to order it. It depends on your relationship with your doctor. You can order it yourself if you have to. You can go request a test and stuff like that. That gets expensive. I was able to get it tested. My doctor just, I don't know why he was willing to do it. He was a DO. He was pretty cool. He ordered some other MTHFR tests for me.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Do you know, I heard Morley say one time that, this whole iron recycling program that he talks about, is supposed to keep iron, free flowing in this whole cycle instead of being stored in tissues. And he was saying that vitamin D actually causes iron to get stored in the kidneys. And I'm wondering if that's could be the result of kidney stones and kidney diseases and things like that, is because vitamin D iron is getting stored there as a result of people taking vitamin D. Just wondering if you know anything about that.
No, I don't, but I want to look at that. I was talking to Morley, and we're going to discuss this at length, because vitamin D deficiency and iron anemia go hand in hand. They're both most likely sequestration of molecules that pathogens use against you. Both of them are fortified in for us. We make vitamin D, but then look at the iron world. That is an outlet for a waste product. Those are inorganic iron filings. We put in kids' cereal. If you've ever put the cereal in a Ziploc and rolled the rolling pin on it, you can catch from the outside. You get that space dust we used to get on the beach with our magnets. Kids are eating that because it's so healthy for them. We need to eat, waste iron. And so if it's added for us, it's either it's typically an outlet for a waste product, and it might be harmful. Fluoride is a great example. So they're going to end up working together, and copper's going to be at play there because of the dirty oxidation versus clean oxidation. It's all going to revolve around the mitochondria and the ATP production and the forms of iron that he's familiar with. So I want to talk to him quite a bit about that.
Yeah, you guys should do a little something together, because your two worlds obviously interconnect quite extensively, but you guys are studying much different pathways of what these things do. It would be really fascinating to, have you guys. I know you're on Matt's show together, which was a great episode, by the way. But yeah, it would be really great for him to learn more about your stuff and vice versa. I mean, you guys are really on it.
Yeah, there's such complex topics. Yeah, it's tough. I wish that I could learn all the retinols, and then there's so many receptors, and I accidentally ran into some of those receptors. So
wow. That's amazing. Are there any times that you would ever recommend someone to supplement vitamin D? Would that ever come up, do you think, or no?
Maybe if they were sequestered in a non-light environment, then it actually, if you don't have light, you would have to have it from diet. So if you could create that kind of scenario, but like I said, that didn't even occur with the people with XP. It just didn't happen. And we act like we're out when you're at 20 or 30 or something like that. You're not out.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you were saying before, because that absence of light, what you're talking about is almost complete absence of light in total. Whereas people will say, oh, I live up in Seattle, I think you live up there, or I live in Canada, so I need to take vitamin D. But really, you're still getting enough vitamin D, and you should be storing it anyway to pull on reserves during the fall and winter months, right?
Yeah, how different is your life compared to anybody else that's historically lived there? And it's just not, it just doesn't work out that all of a sudden, what changed? Nothing changed. Mm-hmm. People have always survived there.
Where do we store? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, people don't understand too that elevation, you get more UVB the higher your elevation is. Elevation. So if you're at Denver, a mile high compared to, say, San Diego on the beach, you're going to think San Diego's way, way more powerful UVB driver. Not even. It's 40 some to 50% stronger UVB forcings at that mile high Denver.
Wow. I've heard about that before. And it's interesting. I think glass also cuts out a lot of the UVA, UVB. I think UVC frequencies of light too, doesn't it?
Right. I think, aren't we supposed to not experience any UVC on the Earth? I thought it all got filtered out.
Yeah, there was a guest we had on a while ago was saying the levels of UVC are actually rising. It was a guy by the name of Jason Prawl was saying that, but I don't, I haven't really looked at it, but
I haven't either.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of our guests, Adam Bergstrom, was saying that that it's possible to get vitamin D from the sun, even if you're in the shade. Do you think that's correct? Maybe through like refraction or reflection or something?
That wouldn't surprise me, because it comes through clouds. They don't just block it. Some of them enhance UV. You don't know, and it would be ever changing. Mm-hmm. They're full of water. They could become just this lens. You could fry yourself under a cloud. You just never you never know. But that is interesting that you could do it. Well, there's light is really interesting. I think Matt was saying that there's environments where they have vitamin D receptors in the deep ocean. I know that the nocturnal lamprey has a vitamin D receptor, mm-hmm. but they never are exposed to light. That's not realistic with the lamprey. It does end up experiencing some light. It can't just hide out like Dracula.
So you think that even if you live in Canada, there's no real need, unless you got maybe a really specific issue with your health or something. There's no real need to take exogenous vitamin D or vitamin D2 or 3, right?
No, there's no reason, because none of those people have low active D, and unfortunately the people that are the sickest, that struggle the most to move it, are the ones that are going to have the active form, because that's where it's going in those people. It's getting activated in their body because the vitamin D receptors are all taken. They're all occupied. The groups that are starting to realize this, there's a fatty jaw disease. I won't be able to think of the real name of it, but these people's jaw pretty much disintegrates, and there are people that tackle that and rebuild these people's jaw. And if there is something in there destroying the ability for the jaw to survive, it's taking all the vitamin D receptors, so everything you do doesn't work. They're going to have to address that issue, whether it's controversial, mainstream or not. If they're going to fix your jaw, they're going to have to say, yeah, these things are blocking the vitamin D receptor, and they fix that so they can give these people a jaw that doesn't just disappear on them again. Mm-hmm. And I can furnish you that paper, and that paper goes at length showing all the ways pathogens in history have stolen or blocked the vitamin D receptor. They did a really good job in that paper putting it together.
That's so interesting. Do you think there's anything like, with Morley, he'll talk about, when you have excess iron, one of the best things you can do is to donate blood, because you're sort of, a couple things are going on when you do that. You kickstart your iron recycling program, so it improves your body's ability to get that whole cyclical process going, but then you also decrease iron stores throughout the body and your tissues as well. If someone has consumed vitamin D3 for many, many years, is there anything we could do? If it's causing calcification, there's things you can do by increasing your magnesium. You can take systemic enzymes. I know Matt's got a bunch of products about that. Are there things people can do to sort of clean up the process, or at least the damage they've done through excess vitamin D supplementation, do you think?
Those things that you said are the things that all the people are going to have to do. They're going to have to continue with all the necessary cofactors, because it's stored. It has a long half-life, especially if you started dosing enough to store in fat D3, not just have a bunch of it lingering in serum. So those have long half-lives, and so you need the cofactors present for a long time. Like if somebody had bariatric surgery, they might release a ton of vitamin D for a long time, which is a different scenario, but that gives you an idea what you had to be prepared for. If you had an acute issue with it, there are medical procedures that they would use where they give you saline and glucocorticoids and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Because like if you presented right now and you had a blood level of 300 or something like that because you were taking crazy dosing, they would start something like that for you. If it's somebody that just tried to get to 80 all the time and never maintained it, and finally checked their active and it was really high, They need to stop right away. I doubt they're going to be able, because they didn't get their 25D up very high, going to get any assistance through the medical community. They're going to be limited to the things we said, the boron, the vitamin K, and things like that. You might want to employ some skin detox. You might want to do some baths, some infrared, some of that stuff you said. I wanted to mention, you were talking about that different light. People need to understand that the skin, they already know it's the largest organ. Most people don't realize it's a non-visual photoreceptor, and it contains all of the necessary hardware to do the HPA axis. It can do all your steroid work for you. You don't have to tax your adrenals with it if you're healthy and normal and functioning in the sun and eating right. It's only when you get in trouble or you try to address it internally that you start to have problems. That's meant to be addressed through the skin, through light and nutrition.
Where does vitamin D primarily get stored? You mentioned a second ago, like in the fat, and like Adam Bergstrom has mentioned before that they should really be testing the fat if they really want to look for vitamin D instead of in the blood serum. Does it get stored in the liver and fat? Is there a primary storage location for it?
The liver is the chief storage organ because that's where it goes. It gets taken there. And it gets activated there and stored there until the body wants it. It can get activated at the cell level too. D3 can go to the cells. They have everything they need to do it too. But I have a really old steroid biochemistry book that was suggested, and it's stored in bone. It's stored in fat. There's two forms of fat it's stored in, brown and white. And the vitamin D gene determines which form of fat you make. So it's really integral to that storage piece. Vitamin D, the VDR, controls which form is made. Muscle's a chief storage area too. And that makes sense. You're using your muscles. They would probably need it for certain things. And if you think about eating a piece of salmon that has D3 in it, that makes sense. You're not eating its liver necessarily. But people do turn to cod liver oil, and they have their own liver. When we look at serum, we are only looking at a couple of the unique forms of 25D. I've found 14 different ones, and we measured the D2, the basic D2 and D3 piece of it. There's epimerization forms. There's sulfated forms. There's a glucondirite, I don't even know if I'm saying it right, form, which is actually a blood storage form of 25D. We don't even bother checking that. The others just happen to be present in serum. This other form that I recently found is meant to be a storage form in serum. You would think that would be the one we're checking.
You would think.
So it's kind of flawed. When you give children D3, they will make the majority of their vitamin 25D in the epimerization form. And you really want to pay attention to that because that form doesn't impact calcium. It's low or no calcium impact. So they're probably trying to not calcify their poor little bodies.
Right? I know, because you see, I mean, vitamin D is like milk is fortified with it. It's fortified in just so many foods, isn't it?
And it's still not enough, and we make it in the sun. It's crazy. When will it be enough? And vitamin K, we make it too. And then I like to point this out. People think that I'm going to take this vitamin D pill, and I already talked about how it's LDL cholesterol going to pick it up. There's no telling where it's going to go. They think if they take a pill of vitamin K, maybe it's bound with it, or they take the separate pill, but they go in together. Both fat solubles. They both suffer the same fate. Both are going to be picked up by LDL cholesterol. Who knows where they're going to end up? Vitamin K is essential in bone building and stuff like that. That's on down the road in the metabolism, not in the acquisition of it. Those are inferior acquisition methods.
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of equate it to like, you stab someone in the chest with a big old knife, right? But then you make sure you have a first aid kit so you can fix the problem. But like, just don't stab someone in the chest, and you won't have to take the first aid kit. I think like that's what's going on when people combine K2 with D3, right?
Your audio cut out just a little bit on that.
Oh yeah, I was just comparing like when companies will combine vitamin K2 along with vitamin D3, and it's like, I was just making the analogy of like how if you were to stab someone with a knife, but as long as you have a first aid kit, you can, sort of dress the wound and clean up the problem. That's kind of what's going on, right? Like
that kind of is. And some people changed their tune when they started selling their vitamin D coupled with vitamin K, and
right.
It's crony capitalism, and it has been since its inception. If you go back to the 30s when it first happened, DeLuca was honest, and he said Madison University withheld publication of papers while they got patents in place that would tell you the papers are going to tell you how wonderful vitamin D was. So they wanted their patents in place, and they make billions every year off their patents on vitamin D. And that Sunshine beer came from the Madison area, and just it was crony capitalism right away. If you look at the yeast cakes that made Fleshman rich, people were eating yeast cakes every morning to get their vitamin D, and they said drink beer in the winter, get sunshine all summer.
Wow, that's so crazy. Are you familiar with the app called D-Minder?
Yes, I am. I'm not familiar with how accurate it is. It's a great tool. Typically for me, I just open my phone, my local weather app, and I just make sure my UV is above 3, and I just don't burn. Other than that, I guess if you had if you really needed to plan your time or something like that, I could see that being wonderful. A really good friend of mine who's passed away now loved that program, and so I do think it's worth having if somebody's focused on that. If nothing else, you're going to be focused on it, and you're going to rise your epigenetics just because of that.
Yeah, because it kind of geolocates your location, time of year, season it is, and the cloudiness, and it can tell you how long you need to stay outside in order to get ample amounts of vitamin D, right?
Yeah, it is a great program. And then taking the clouds into effect, there might be times when it's wrong. You're still making it, or even making more than if there were no clouds, like I said earlier. But if you need a tool, absolutely, it's a great tool.
Mm-hmm. So now I'm reading off one of your talking points that you sent to me, which I thought was interesting, number 6. And you said here that excess active D wreaks havoc on other nuclear receptor systems like thyroid, adrenal, and glucocorticoid. So what I'm wondering is, like, when you start affecting hormones, and I'm looking at like what you were saying before with osteoporosis and bone issues, and perhaps even pH of the blood, and you start looking at hormones, I'm thinking like cancer. I'm thinking of so many different diseases that are going on these days, that could be tied to excess vitamin D intake. Because like, how do you think it's impacting like heart disease and cancers as well?
I think it impacts everything because it's hormone imprinting, and it starts in the womb for the children, because mom's taking it. And mom has 40% elevated active vitamin D just because she's pregnant, and her prolactin drives it up. And it's probably a good thing if you don't get in there and mess with it. But they're going to have deficiency if you look at their 25D, just because we raised the goal. So they're going to probably take some vitamin D, and they're going to imprint the child. They're going to imprint those steroid receptors there. It's probably the cause of celiacs. I have a ton of papers. I probably have 30 papers on hormone imprinting on vitamin D. So it starts right there. So we don't know the long-term consequences. But let's go back to what we were talking about with Epstein-Barr. It's got an antigen that's the right shape to steal the vitamin D receptor. But its presence will cause copious amounts of 125D to be created, for which there is no home. So that vitamin D is going to wander off, and it's going to take the thyroid, the glucocorticoid, the adrenal. It's going to grab another nuclear receptor, probably. And then they're not going to be able to do their job. They don't have their hormone to run their process. But what people don't realize is the body makes a lot of antimicrobial peptides. There's no immunity to this. These things cannot become immune. It's like throwing acid on something. There's no immunity. That's why they block their creation. And not only do the vitamin D receptors make these antimicrobial peptides, so do the adrenal and the glucocorticoid receptors. They actually make more of the antimicrobial peptides than vitamin D receptors. So when you lose all the work of the vitamin D receptor, it's not making its warriors, it's not making the chemical or biological ones. And there's a ton of it. It's blocking your adrenal gland from doing its own job. And it's not making another 14 or so different antimicrobial peptides. So, I mean, that's the cascade. Wow. Look at that, and look at the women. Track them through a pregnancy. That 125D rises really high. That's a tipping point for many women. Some women can only have one baby, and they'll struggle to have another one. It's just the body has to create such a mundane environment for the fetus, and there's so many bad things. They can flourish in a hurry on you, and you'll spend maybe the rest of your life trying to rein them back in.
Yeah, it's just crazy that when I look at people and pregnant women and things, and they're getting on supplements and things, they're taking iron, they're taking vitamin D3, they're taking ascorbic acid, they're taking all these things that are just like, oh my gosh, no wonder why your pregnancy was so difficult. It's
right.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Right. Well, you can have stuff at the foundation of all your health that people think is healthy that can be destroying from the get-go. And I talked with Matt a little bit about it, and I mean, we just mentioned it, and that would be fluoride. Fluoride is an exposure that most people have, and if you don't know what the impact of fluoride is on the immune system, or how it works synergistically with lead and aluminum in the body and things like that, then you should find out. You don't want a bunch of fluoride. And what's most fascinating is if you do your research and you find out how fluoride came to be added to water, and you go back, the mommy of fluoride is the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project, what's called Project F, if you do your research. And when you read the unredacted stuff that finally came out, you'll understand what bad news fluoride is. It's an outlet for a waste product that's harmful, and that's that. And so if you have that at the foundation, you have a lot going on.
Yeah, it's amazing. Gosh, how all of this gets impacted. How much of vitamin D or hormone D, as we should call it, how much do you think we actually know about it?
I think compartmentalized, there's a lot known about it. It just depends on which aspect and which molecule you want to read about. Mm-hmm. Recently, I was talking to somebody that deals with dioxin in the cancer tumor environment, and there's some vitamin D molecules that should work with that, but there aren't ones that anybody's ever heard of. So there's a lot of research on that, but that person that's studying that gene within the cancer isn't actually necessarily even thinking vitamin D is a solution. They're actually still stuck in the tumor. There's no vitamin D there, so it's not their first thinking.
Yeah, I know. It's so crazy. I mean, it's just so amazing to me how many, theoretically smart people there are promoting vitamin D. I was doing a search on Amazon the other day, and I just put in vitamin D under the book section. And I mean, like every book, like dozens and dozens and dozens of books, I had to scroll through like 3 pages just to get to Michael Hollick's book. And he's like the sort of the premier sort of guy being touted out there and the benefits of vitamin D3. But I had to scroll through like 3 pages of all these books talking about the benefits of vitamin D. It's like, it's amazing.
Right. And they're all built around the 25D. A second ago, I want to correct something I said, because I said there's no vitamin D in the tumor. That's how I closed that statement I just said. Uh-huh. And that isn't true. I meant the form of vitamin D that I found that should be there isn't there, obviously, because there's a tumor. There's a ton of vitamin D in the tumor, and people need to realize that. A tumor expresses vitamin D receptors like crazy, 300% more than the adjacent healthy tissue. It calls vitamin D to it, and that's why they thought that's the answer. It burns through your vitamin D. What is really going on in there, though? Because in healthy tissue, a lot goes on. It makes VDREs, it makes macrophages and stuff like that. Is the tumor possibly using it to police itself like the ant plant does with ants? You don't know. It's a bad deal. Vitamin D clearly doesn't go and kill the tumors like we've been sold forever. Nobody'd have an issue if that were the case.
Yeah, I know. It's so fascinating. Are there different aspects of research regarding vitamin D in terms of like applications to certain disease conditions that you are starting to, or that you enjoy researching?
Well, I've read some of the stuff where they're working in a cancer environment, but what they do is they want to find some way first to block its progress.
Block the research, you mean?
Block its growth. No, block the growth of the tumor.
Okay.
Through some method, like block its venous supply of blood or something like that, so they can just hold it at that state so it doesn't keep evolving and growing, and then they want to start throwing stuff at it. They gotta snapshot it, almost like hold it at a baseline. But that's not realistic. That's everybody's already going to have cancer. It's just the work is so different than the real world. They create the cancer in the first place, then they try to get rid of it. None of it's natural. And when most of it's done in a petri dish where it's just the vitamin D and whatever else they're treating, there's no vitamin A, there's no receptors, there's no system there whatsoever. You could be dumping Listerine or Gatorade in there. It might have the same effect. You really don't know.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'd like to explore more of this if you're willing to come on, again, and I'd love to just explore anything new that you're learning, because like I said, there's a handful of people like you and Morley and Dr. Trevor Marshall down in Australia, and there's some other people talking about vitamin D, but I mean, you guys are like a handful of people in the midst of like hundreds and thousands of people promoting it. And so if you're willing, I'd like to do some more shows with you if you learn some more things, and that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that I like to put out there for everybody to focus on, especially people that promote it, is find the study where the vitamin D deficiency is not only demonstrated in 25D, it's also demonstrated in the active form, without a defect in the parathyroids or the kidneys in making that form. That data set doesn't exist. And that should bother everyone. Why does that not exist? If we have 80% of the world deficient, we should have a ton. Some of these studies should have looked at that, but they don't. And that might just be because they're funded to specifically look at certain things. If you look at a graph that blames vitamin 25 OHD3 for disease, it will show you everybody below 20, let's say. There's all the diseased people. But those are the same people that would have the high active vitamin D. So here they're on the low side of the storage form, but they'd be the people off the charts with the active form. But all they did, and it's the weakest science, I don't even understand how it came to pass. All they're doing is taking the disease groups, and you have this form of cancer, you have that form of cancer, this person has diabetes, and they blame their 2,5-D level on their disease. They say it's the cause. So everything is, that the solution to cancer is just vitamin D. We don't need to keep looking for the cause of cancer. It's low vitamin D. There's no microbe, there's no bacteria, there's no virus. Everything is the fault of low 25D. Forget all the other molecules. These person could have died the next day because they had absolutely no vitamin K in their body or vitamin A or E. We don't know, but we only have a snapshot of what their 25D was, and we're going to blame all disease on that. You could not publish a graph of vitamin K levels or vitamin E levels or red blood cell magnesium level and draw a line and say, in disease incidence due to low red blood cell magnesium. Nobody's going to publish it. It's a joke.
Yeah, it's weird, right? I mean, like I guess what you were saying is when there's money involved and there's hundreds of millions of dollars in research and grants and things, you can see why it does. What is the just in closing? Do we know what a good number for 125 would be?
For 125, it's your immune response. Healthy people, Trevor actually has a pretty good range. Most people are going to be in the 40s.
For 125?
Yeah. Most people are in the 40s. Mine was 46. If they aren't having an immune response, and they could have immune response. The thing about your 125D, in the tests I've seen that people have had multiple tests, I've seen it be pretty stable. At least going in the direction I expected. Say somebody had it high from taking D3, it was dropping, but it's dropping a lot slower than you'd expect. I mean, months. It took months, believe it or not, to go down. But that level was a 76. The top of the range is 72. But if you go in like a vitamin D deficiency awareness group right now on Facebook, these people have 125, 140. Their levels are way up there. Way, I mean, double.
So I imagine their
double the
25
top
would
of the
be
range.
low, right?
No, these if it's hard to say. No, these people are chasing a high 25D, and I think most of them can attain it. I think if you went into a vitamin D deficiency group and you were hanging at 20 and you wanted to go to 80 and you were one of these people that's not going to be able to do it, like the X I told you went from 23 to 11, you're not going to be in that group very long. They're going to be like 2,000 a day is not enough. Pretty soon you'll be taking 10,000 a day and it's not going anywhere, and you're going to probably be getting pretty sick.
Wow, that's amazing.
You know.
Oh my goodness, gosh, all this is so interesting. So yeah, if you're willing to come on and on a semi-regular basis, I'd love to chat with you more about all your research, and I love this kind of information that's sort of antithetical to what the mainstream alternative is putting out. So I would love to talk with you further.
Yeah, let's do it. And why don't you get some questions from people and where they want me to elaborate and stuff? Because the deep science people really they didn't want to have a whole lot of that. They want to hear conversation about it, apparently. So I'd love to do that.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, I put out on Instagram some, that you were going to be on. And it's funny, I don't know, I think people didn't get the right impression because they wrote in a ton of questions, but they were all not related to vitamin D. So I don't know what happened there, but next time we'll have some questions for you.
No worries.
All right. So where can people find you? If people, is the best place the secosteroid hormone D group on Facebook?
Yeah. And, my personal page, Jim Stephenson Jr. on Facebook as well. And I don't mind if people message me there. I really don't. I usually try to talk to people one-to-one. I really want to help people. I'm at the point now where I don't really want to debate. That negative energy just is, I don't need the adrenaline release, and I just, I want to educate rather than debate.
I hear that. I mean, there's so much debate already going on with everything related to the big C, little v going on right now, right? I mean,
exactly. Exactly.
All right, my friend. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you again. And I really appreciate your work and, educating people about this. So I'll definitely be in touch. I'm not sure when this is going to go live because we're a little bit behind, but as soon as it goes live, I'll send you the link as well.
Perfect.
Awesome. Jim, thanks so much, man.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Have a great one.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. All right. There you go, Mr. Jim Stephenson. I hope you guys enjoyed that show. That was really interesting, right? The fact that he's bringing up a lot of the science and the technical aspects of this is really fascinating, right? When you look at the different levels of vitamin D and the testing and all that stuff going on. So if you know of anyone, like maybe perhaps any prominent people in the natural health field, or maybe your own, naturopathic doctor who is prescribing vitamin D, or people that you want to help, pass this video on to them, because I think that it could really, really help a lot. Because like what he was saying was that we're causing a lot of the diseases and issues, by taking the D3 and then we're trying to clean them up afterwards. So, if you can avoid the D3, it could go a long way in not causing the problem to begin with. So again, I hope you really enjoyed that show. We're going to take a little break right now, but I've got a few thoughts I want to share with you. But here we go. We're going to talk a little bit right now about molecular hydrogen. And here's our buddy Brian Hoyer talking about the benefits of this amazing, amazing substance called molecular hydrogen.
And then there's other mitigation strategies that I'm working on for outdoors, and there's different things you can do to mitigate some of the damage. One of the things that Dr. Mercola recommends is molecular hydrogen, and that's actually been shown to basically mitigate 80% of the damage of free radical peroxynitrate, which stimulates those, which is created from the stimulation of those voltage-gated calcium ion channels. And so drinking molecular hydrogen when you're acutely exposed to those frequencies can help.
Yeah, and here's our buddy Nathan talking about it as well.
Getting healthy sun exposure can do more than any supplement. I do take some supplements. Most of the supplements I take are on the short term. When I fly, I do molecular hydrogen because that's really a good quencher of free radicals, especially a lot of the free radicals made from EMFs. And when you fly, you get exposed to a whole bunch of EMFs. But here's a hack, because molecular hydrogen is not super cheap, but your body also makes molecular hydrogen. And the best way to do that is by getting infrared light on your gut. So that light penetrates into your gut, and your bacteria are able to liberate or pull out molecular hydrogen from your food.
Yeah, so guys, molecular hydrogen is sort of a thing that I've been introduced to in the last 5 years, and really kind of been doing some research on it and studying it more so in the last couple of years. And we've been using a machine called the AquaCure that I really, really love, because I started out doing the tablets, and the tablets are good, but they're just kind of, they're great for traveling. I would take some tablets with me from traveling, but one of the best things I like about molecular hydrogen is that it's the particle size. It's 700 times smaller than CoQ10, 400 times smaller than vitamin C. And so it has the ability, like Tyler Lebaron was saying on our show, the head of the Molecular Hydrogen Institute, to repair the DNA. And it repairs the mitochondrial DNA, and it gets into the brain. So it gets places in the body that nothing else can get into, simply because of the particle size. But what it has the ability to do is not just act as a free radical, but it also has the ability to reduce oxidation and rust. And so this is primarily the cause of all disease. And so if you can reduce oxidation and rust, you're going to go a long way to improving your health. And there's been a lot of people, claiming that it's turning around gray hair. It has amazing qualities. I'm looking at an article here. It helps to fight aging with diabetes. It may battle cancerous tumors, autoimmune disease, because what it does is it corrects DNA damage. And so as a result of that, you're going to start replicating at a higher proficiency, making more energy. It's one of those things that I would highly recommend that you have in your home. So you can start out with the tablets, but it's going to be much more cost effective to get the machine, because the machine over time, you can drink the water, but you can also breathe the gas. And that's what I do. You can also even bubble the water into your bathtub too. So there's a lot of different ways you can use it. You can even do spot treatments on different areas of your body. Like let's say you've just had surgery, or you've got a knee injury, or let's say you're dealing with a skin lesion, something on your skin. You can do spot treatments. If you've got issues with your eyes, it comes with a pair of glasses that George has sort of modified, where you can bubble the gas into your eyes. It's just an amazing thing. So I highly recommend the AquaCure machine and looking into this technology. We do have a 10% discount code. So if you guys are interested in grabbing this, there's a coupon code. And if you go to the store page, you can listen to the 2 interviews we did with Mr. George Wiseman about it. And I highly, highly recommend it. Also, I wanted to tell you about something really simple and cool, and that's aloe vera. I don't know if you guys are on aloe vera, but you should be. Here's Dr. Donnie Wilson talking about all the major benefits of aloe vera.
And then I encourage, we can talk more about this. What do I do to help people speed up the healing of leaky gut? Mm-hmm. You mentioned aloe before, mm-hmm. and that is one of the herbs that I definitely recommend, using for helping to heal leaky gut. You want to use herbs that are anti-inflammatory and soothing and healing to the intestinal lining. So aloe is a great one.
So aloe is something that's been used for thousands of years. I recommend it if you're dealing with any kind of gut issues. I really recommend. The first thing I tell everyone in our academy is to get on aloe vera, because it has over 75 different active compounds, vitamins, minerals, enzymes, amino acids, unique sugars like polysaccharides. It accelerates wound healing. It prevents aging. It's antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral. It produces this component called ace-mannan, which is an immune stimulator, and it's antiviral as well. And so Stockton Aloe 1 is the product I always recommend. But it's even better if you can sort of grow it on your own. That's ideal. But I don't know about you, but so many of us live such busy lives. I don't have time to grow this stuff. So what they do is they send it to you. It's raw, it's hand harvested, unfiltered, unprocessed, it's unheated. There's no preservatives, there's no chemicals. They ship it right after they harvest it. And I think they only ship it on like 2 days a week to make sure that it doesn't defrost, because they send it to you flash frozen. This is just a great thing. You can do a therapeutic dose, which is like 24 ounces a day, or you could do like a maintenance dose, which is I think about 4 to 6 ounces a day, which is what I do. And it's just a great, great tool. So if you're looking to heal your gut, aloe should definitely be a part of your protocol. So I really recommend the AquaCure and the Stockton Aloe One. Such good products. And I'm just so thankful to be able to recommend products that I love, companies I use, and things that I think will actually move the needle for you. So, so I hope you guys enjoyed the show with Mr. Jim Stephenson. Go check him out on Facebook, the secosteroid Hormone D group, and you can learn more about and sort of dive into his work a little bit further there. And there's about almost 8,000 members there at the time of this recording. So really, really great resource, and sort of paradoxical or maybe antithetical to what the mainstream alternative is promoting. And so I want to thank my friend Matt Blackburn for bringing Jim on, because I had known about Jim, but I just forgot about him. There's a lot of really great people out there doing great work, and then all of a sudden you forget about them, and then they're on a podcast you listen to, and so he reminded me to have him on. So thank you, Matt, for that. And so again, we'll put links to everything we talked about on today's show, all the sponsors, the aloe vera, the molecular hydrogen, the Juve red light therapy device, the Spurti vitamin D lamp, if you're interested in that. We have that in our store, as well as the sauna that we talked about with Daniel Vitalis and Dr. Nunley. So, as well as Dr. Nunley's dental practice too. I can't recommend him enough. healthysmilesforlife.com. I'll put a link to him as well. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that show. Pass it on to your friends, please. I would greatly appreciate that. And if you want to take your health further and join a community of other crazy people like us who really love looking further into health and biohacking and that kind of stuff, join the Extreme Health Academy. This is where we live. This is where we spend our time. This is where I do weekly Zoom sessions. We're going to be doing a liver support protocol here pretty soon. Every couple months, we're focusing on different aspects of health, like doing a colon cleanse or a heavy metal cleanse or a parasite cleanse, these types of things, because it's really important. These days, taking care of your health is a radical act, and we all need to avoid going to the doctor, whether it's for something acute that we can fix ourselves, having some handy first aid kit necessary, on hand that we can, utilize and know how to use with natural ingredients, or chronic diseases. Like, we really need to stay away from hospitals, stay away from doctors. I believe that the number 1 and number 2 cause of death is heart disease and cancers. And number 3 is what they call iatrogenic, which means that they're doctor influenced, which means doctors are causing. The third leading cause of disease in America is from doctors. And you could argue that since they're involved in cancer and heart disease, they are the top 3 is going to your doctor. So it's really important that we make sure and learn how to doctor ourselves. And I like to focus on things that move the needle the most. There's so many things to look at. There's homeopathy, there's essential oils, there's there's all kinds of different therapies you could do, right, that are out there. Acupuncture, massage, PEMF. There's all kinds of things you can do, but let's focus on the things that move the needle the most. And those things are your environment. How our biology responds to our environment is the number 1 way that our genes express themselves genotypically. So it's like, let's make sure that we're living in an environment that facilitates homeostasis, because your body always wants to remain in homeostasis. Your body is always healing. But the problem is that we're living in toxic environments on so many levels. And so this is why I always recommend for people, don't start with diet. Like, diet is the last place. Diet is so hard to change, right? I mean, you can get on, if you're going to focus on things that you consume, focus on adding supplements in, targeted supplementation, because it's easy to take a pill, right? It's not easy to change a diet you've had for 40 years, 50 years, and trying to change all of your cravings and food addictions and all that kind of stuff. Like, don't start at the hardest place. If you're going to change with things you eat, start by adding some targeted supplements in. I recommend the ones from MitoLife. There's a discount code for 15% off. Those are available in our store, Biocharge Me, specific targeted supplements. But, start there, and then start altering your environment. Change the lighting in your home. Fix the dirty electricity in your walls. Take out a lot of the plastics. Get rid of the chemicals in your carpet. Start altering your environment. Spend more time in the sun. Block blue light. Mitigate a lot of that stuff, and your physiology will thank you, and your physiology will return back to normal. But don't start at the hardest place that moves the needle the least. Start with altering your environment, because it's really difficult, right, to change your food addictions you've had for 25, 30 years. That's really hard to do, right? It's like a yo-yo battle. You go back and forth. But you know what? If you get a Magnetico sleep pad and sleep in a magnetic field, or if you remove all plastic and swap it out with glass, right? Or let's say you get rid of all your cookware and get Extrema cookware, which we have in our store, which is non-toxic, or glass. You're going to cook anyway. You're going to sleep on your bed anyway. Why not get some dirty electricity filters in your wall, the green waves that we sell in our store? $30 for one. These are like passive ways to alter your environment that affect your health way more than food. And then I don't advocate eating unhealthy food, but I'd rather have someone eat unhealthy food, take some good supplements, and alter their environment before they eat the best diet ever and keep their environment. Like you're sitting next to a Wi-Fi tower outside your room or whatever, a smart meter. So I recommend altering your environment first. That's the easiest thing, because really it's just like $100, $200, and it's passive. You don't have to do it. Just install it, put the thing Magnetico on your bed, and you sleep just like you would any other night, right? And you get the benefits without having to do anything. There's no discipline involved. So that's what I advocate. And this is what we talk about in the Extreme Health Academy. And so join us over there. There's a free discount code. If you guys want to go to extremehealthacademy.com and use the code EHR14, I'll give you a free 2-week trial. Come and say hello in the forums. I'm in the forums every day. We have live events going on every Friday morning. I'm live. Once a month, Dr. Bergman is live. Twice a month, my wife, Kate, is doing a women's wellness hour. She's live on the first and third Wednesdays of every month. We're possibly going to get our buddy Mike Bergman to do a live once. So we've got tons of stuff going on. We're doing a cleanse right now, not really a cleanse, but a support protocol that we're going to do. And we're doing things all the time to support our health. There's a lot of cool people in there, thousands of people in there. So come and join us. I'd really love to see you and give yourself that gift. It's a 2-week trial. Come say hello. And, we have a private audio podcast that's available for active members, so you can take us with you on the go. There's a community map, so if you're looking for other members in your area of other crazy people like us, you can find them, a thriving forum, chat rooms. There's all kinds of cool stuff. So come and join us in there. Take your health to new levels. And I hope you enjoyed that show. Pass it on to your friends. Tag me on Instagram. I'd appreciate that. And that is basically about it. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will see you next week. And I'll see you, if you're a member, I'll see you Friday morning in the Academy Zoom rooms, Friday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific. All right. Love you guys. That was extremehealthradio.com/695, and I'll see you next week.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice of any kind. None of the information offered here should be interpreted as a diagnosis of any disease, nor an attempt to treat or prevent any disease or condition. While information in this blog is discussed in the context of numerous conditions, it can be dangerous to take action based on any information in this blog, or to start any health program without first consulting a health professional. The content found here is for informational purposes only, and is in no way intended as medical advice, as a substitute for medical counseling, or as a treatment/cure for any disease or health condition, and nor should it be continued as such. Always work with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, prescription drug use, lifestyle, or exercise activities. This information is provided as is, and the reader/viewer assumes all risks from the use, non-use, or misuse of this information.